We know, I mean, President Biden has said, you know, he doesn't believe that human beings should be bargaining chips. We've had strong language in the last few days from our prime minister talking about this kind of behavior. It's antagonistic language when it comes to China. Is a strong, united front the way to go? We know China reacts poorly to those kinds of things, but if everybody's doing it, does it actually lend some credibility to the idea that you can sway Beijing?
Well, I think swaying Beijing is a very tough nut to crack, and I think increasingly so. And I think the most effective way of dealing with Beijing, as you and I have discussed before, is through a multilateral or collective action effort. I think this is what scares Beijing more than anything, rather than a bilateral approach, which is what Mr. Trump took, at least on the trade side. So I don't think we have any other choice, frankly.
One of the places that we have seen growing consensus and now outspoken consensus is on the treatment of the Uyghurs, Chinese Uyghurs. How do you put that in the mix of how much it helps and how much it might harm? Again, going back to this is no country, even our own, yours or mine, likes to be called out for any behavior by other countries. China, though, least of all, I think it's safe to say.
I think so, but I think when you look at the data and the evidence on what is happening in Xinjiang, it is a serious infraction of human rights. And I do think one of the things I think Mr. Biden prides himself on is to try to renew that kind of conversation around the world. And this represents, I think, a very serious issue for China, and they're going to have to deal with it one way or another. I think it comes down to a human being kinds of question and whether or not this is the kind of world we want to live in. So I don't think we have much choice but to play hardball at this point.
There are this whole other set of issues that the U.S. has pursued, and under President Trump, they were also, you know, kind of central to the story. It may be a more clear narrative with the President Biden, but things like China's treatment of intellectual property, the way that it forms financial or economic partnerships, the fact that it doesn't really necessarily play by the same rules when it comes to global trade, and the whole host of issues behind that. What are the chances of bringing China to heel, of getting China on side, some kind of general agreement with the rest of the world?
Well, I think, you know, as many people know, China is intent on decoupling their economy from the rest of the world. If you think about the way that they've treated their WTO membership, it's certainly an early sign going back to 2001 that they're not interested in following the rules to which they've subscribed. So I'm not sure, frankly, at this point, how to get them to an agreement other than, you know, for instance, we have a G7 summit coming up in June in Cornwall. I think that's a very important opportunity, particularly on the technology and R&D side for the G7 to collaborate, frankly, for the first time in a serious way. I've actually proposed creating a working group for the G7 called the R&D7 to think about how to take on China in the technology race. I think we have no choice but to do that, frankly.
One thing that seems clear throughout this pandemic is that many countries who had been very trade-oriented and open about their supply chains and sourcing, and Canada is high on this list, have come to realize that there are imperfections to that model. Even before that, though, we had seen this path, right, to more protectionism, more nationalism. Is that just exacerbated here? Are we going? Should businesses, thinking of the future, plan on that?
Well, I think it depends on the longevity of the pandemic, but I'm sure maybe you're referring to the reports that have come out of Beijing in the last couple of days saying that they will allow foreigners to come in as long as they take their COVID vaccine. And, you know, they're treating, the statement was that they're treating all foreigners alike. But that is in essence a non-tariff barrier to trade. So they're really upping the ante there. Why can't one present a vaccine passport from another country where you're testifying that you've actually had the vaccine already? So I think it would be naive to believe that China is not feeling its oats. I think the behavior that was displayed in Anchorage, regardless of what one might think of how the U.S. Performed, I think it's very clear. I think a lot of people were taken aback by how steadfast the Chinese are. And I think that is where they are right now, unfortunately.
So when you talk about this need for an R&D7, that the G7 needs to be thinking about a new kind of a partnership, flesh that out a little bit, Harry. What should we be looking at doing?
Well, right now, we have international science and technology agreements among the advanced democracies, but they really are a weak link compared to what we do with the rest of the G7, for instance, in trade and investment. But I think it's time that we have to pool our resources, create more mobility for technology flows and scientists, and open up among the G7 to put in place a much more robust collective exercise in R&D, and not just in the pre-competitive form, but as we get closer and closer to the market of science and technology. And this has not been tried before. All the G7 countries have been going it alone, except for occasional bilateral science and technology agreements. They're nothing like, as I said, nothing like the kinds of cooperation we have on trade and investment, generally speaking. And we have a core value, which is, we're advanced democracies. We should be approaching this in a collective manner.
Harry, great to have you with us. Always appreciate your thoughts.
Thank you.
Harry Brodman is chair of the Emerging Markets Practice at the Berkeley Research Group and former senior White House economic official.